Something happened inside the Cleveland Browns organization that doesn't feel accidental, and the way it unfolded has fans asking questions the team hasn't answered directly. This wasn't just another coaching change, this wasn't a quiet reshuffle or a standard offseason move. One coach went from being a supposed rising star to completely erased from the conversation. No second interview, no fallback role, no explanation from the team, just gone. That coach was Tommy Rees. And what's raising eyebrows isn't just that he didn't get promoted, it's how fast and final the decision was. According to reports, Rees isn't expected to return to Cleveland in any capacity, not as a coordinator, not as a position coach, nothing. That kind of clean cut usually signals something much deeper than performance. Because here's the part that doesn't add up. Rees wasn't some outsider, he was handpicked, closely tied to the previous regime, trusted enough to call plays, trusted enough to interview directly with ownership. And then suddenly he wasn't trusted at all. While other candidates were being brought back for second looks, Rees was crossed off completely. That alone tells you this wasn't just about football. There's been a lot of buzz online suggesting this decision traces back to what was happening behind closed doors, in the locker room, in meetings, and especially in the quarterback room. Rumors claim there was growing frustration, fractured trust, and a belief that certain players were never given a fair opportunity to compete. At the center of that speculation is Shedeur Sanders. Fans have been debating all season whether the quarterback competition was real or just for show, whether development was prioritized or quietly stalled. And now, with the coaches who oversaw that process being removed, those debates feel less hypothetical. To be clear, these are allegations, not confirmed facts, but in the NFL, perception matters, especially when actions seem to support it. Because if this were just about wins and losses, the Browns wouldn't have erased an entire coaching lane overnight. Which raises the real question. Did Cleveland just admit something wasn't right without ever saying it out loud? And if so, what does that mean for the future they're suddenly trying to rebuild? At first, the move didn't look dramatic. Coaches get passed over all the time, but what happened with Tommy Rees wasn't a quiet not yet. It was a hard stop, and that's why it immediately stood out across the league. Rees wasn't just overlooked for the head coaching job, he wasn't told to wait his turn. According to multiple reports, he was eliminated entirely from the search and is unlikely to return to the Cleveland Browns in any role. In NFL terms, that's not a pause, that's a rejection. The kind that usually means something behind the scenes went very wrong. What made it even more noticeable was the timing. Rees actually got his interview. He sat down with ownership, he made his pitch, and then instead of moving forward, the door slammed shut. No follow-up, no second meeting. Meanwhile, other candidates were being called back, including coaches from within the same building. That contrast is what raised eyebrows. If the Browns simply believed Rees wasn't ready to be a head coach, the logical move would have been to keep him around as continuity. Young offensive coordinators don't just disappear overnight, especially ones with high-profile backgrounds. But that's not what happened here. Cleveland didn't hedge, they cut clean. That decision became even louder once reports surfaced from Browns insider Mary Kay Cabot, who indicated Rees is unlikely to return in any capacity. Not demoted, not reassigned. Gone. For someone recently labeled a rising offensive mind, that's a sharp reversal. Naturally, fans started connecting dots. Rees wasn't just another assistant. He was closely aligned with former head coach Kevin Stefansky. He was part of that inner circle, and when Stefansky lost the locker room and was removed, many believe the fallout didn't stop with him. While there's no official statement confirming that Rees was removed because of loyalty or internal politics, the optics are hard to ignore. Especially when you factor in the quarterback situation. All season long, debates swirled around whether Shedeur Sanders ever received a genuine opportunity. Those debates didn't go away, they intensified. And when the coach most closely tied to that process was suddenly erased from the organization, it shifted how people viewed the entire season. This is why Rees' exit hit differently. It wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, but it was decisive. And in the NFL, decisive moves usually mean the organization isn't just changing personnel, it's correcting something it believes should have never happened in the first place. And once you realize that, the next question becomes unavoidable. What did Cleveland see behind the scenes that made keeping Tommy Rees impossible? Once Tommy Rees was eliminated from the picture, attention immediately shifted to one relationship that kept coming up behind the scenes: his connection to Kevin Stefansky. Because this wasn't just a professional overlap. In the eyes of many inside and outside the building, the two were inseparable. Stefansky didn't just work with Rees, he handpicked him. He brought him into Cleveland, elevated his role, and eventually trusted him with play-calling duties. That kind of trust matters in the NFL. It signals alignment, shared philosophy, a coach you believe will carry out your vision without hesitation. And for a while, that partnership looked solid from the outside. But according to reports and growing speculation, that same alignment may have become a liability. As Stefansky's grip on the locker room reportedly weakened, scrutiny didn't stop at the head coach. It spread to everyone closely tied to him. The belief among many fans is that when ownership began evaluating what went wrong, they weren't just looking at play design or game management, they were looking at loyalty chains, who challenged decisions, who stayed quiet, and who benefited from the existing structure. This is where the Stefansky pipeline theory comes in. The theory, which remains unverified, suggests Rees was viewed less as an independent voice and more as an extension of Stefansky's system. Not someone pushing for internal change, but someone protecting continuity, even when continuity wasn't working. To be clear, there's no official confirmation that Rees actively blocked progress or ignored player development concerns. But perception carries weight, especially when it lines up with outcomes fans and players questioned all season. One of the biggest talking points tied to this connection is the quarterback situation. All year, the Browns publicly framed it as a competition. Privately, rumors suggest decisions were already locked in, and according to speculation, Rees never publicly or internally distanced himself from those decisions. Whether that was loyalty, agreement, or silence is unknown, but silence can be just as loud in an NFL evaluation. That's why Rees didn't get the benefit of separation. When Stefansky was removed, Cleveland didn't pause and reassess Rees on his own merits. They moved swiftly, almost as if they'd already decided he represented more of the past than the future. No second interview, no chance to reset the narrative, just a clean break. In this league, that kind of move usually signals one thing: ownership wanted distance, not just from a coach, but from a way of operating. Whether the Stefansky connection fully explains Rees' exit or only part of it, the result is the same. Cleveland didn't want remnants of the old structure lingering in the building. And once that decision was made, the next phase became inevitable: a closer look at who that structure affected the most, and why his situation suddenly feels very different moving forward. This is where the story stops being about coaching politics and starts being about opportunity. Because no matter how you slice it, the situation surrounding Shedeur Sanders is the part fans keep coming back to, and for good reason. All season long, the Cleveland Browns publicly framed the quarterback room as an open competition. Coaches spoke about earning reps. Media members were told decisions were based on practice performance. On the surface, it sounded fair. But according to reports and growing fan speculation, what was happening behind the scenes didn't fully match that narrative. The biggest issue: first-team reps. In the NFL, reps with the starters aren't a reward, they're a requirement. That's where timing is built. That's where trust develops. And according to multiple reports and observations, Shedeur wasn't consistently getting those opportunities. Meanwhile, the competition was being evaluated as if both quarterbacks were operating on equal footing. That disconnect is what sparked the controversy. Fans argue that you can't call something a true competition when one player is getting the majority of meaningful reps and the other is rotating in late or working with backups. From that perspective, Shedeur didn't lose a job, he was never fully allowed to compete for it. That's not a proven fact, but it's a conclusion many reached after watching how the season unfolded. To be clear, there has been no official confirmation that Shedeur was intentionally held back. These claims remain allegations, opinions, and interpretations. But perception matters, especially when decisions start lining up with outcomes fans questioned from the start. What added fuel to the fire was what happened when Shedeur finally did see the field. Despite limited preparation, he showed composure. He stayed aggressive without panicking. He led scoring drives late in games and gave the Browns a chance to win when things were already unraveling. For many viewers, that performance didn't look like someone who wasn't ready. It looked like someone adjusting on the fly. That's where frustration turned into suspicion. If Shedeur could operate like that without consistent first-team reps, fans began asking what he might have looked like with real preparation. With a game plan tailored to him, with coaches fully invested in his development instead of committed to an earlier decision. Critics push back by saying coaches see more than fans ever will in meetings, in film, in practice. And that's true. But supporters counter with a simple point: development can't happen in theory alone. You don't evaluate quarterbacks in a vacuum, you evaluate them through opportunity. Now, with the coaching structure that oversaw that process being dismantled, the narrative has shifted. What once looked like a verdict on Shedeur's ability now looks, to many, like a verdict on the process that evaluated him. And that's why this controversy refuses to fade. Because if the competition wasn't truly equal, then the Browns' biggest mistake wasn't choosing the wrong quarterback. It was never letting one fully show what he could be in the first place. When Shedeur Sanders finally stepped into meaningful action, the reaction wasn't relief, it was confusion. Not because he played flawless football, but because he looked far more composed than many expected given the circumstances surrounding him. This is where performance and preparation collide. Quarterbacks don't magically flip a switch on game day. Timing, confidence, and decision-making are built during the week, through reps, trust, and a system designed with the quarterback in mind. And according to reports and widespread fan observation, Shedeur didn't have the benefit of that foundation. He entered games without the rhythm most starters take for granted. Yet when the moment came, he didn't unravel. Shedeur stood in the pocket, he took hits. He didn't rush reads or panic under pressure. Late in games, he led drives that gave the Cleveland Browns a real chance to win. That matters, because poise is one of the hardest traits to teach, and it usually shows up only when preparation meets opportunity. Here, it showed up despite the lack of it. That's what made fans pause. If this was Shedeur operating without consistent first-team reps, without an offense fully tailored to him, and without clear organizational backing, what would he look like with all of that in place? That question didn't come from blind optimism. It came from watching a quarterback survive in conditions most young players crumble under. Critics argue flashes aren't enough. They say preparation has to be earned, not assumed. They say coaches see mistakes fans overlook: footwork, timing, progressions, and that's fair. But supporters push back with one point that's hard to dismiss: you can't evaluate growth if you never truly invest in development. Preparation isn't just about studying tape, it's about trust. About knowing the offense is built to highlight what you do well, not expose what you're still learning. If a quarterback senses doubt from the people calling plays, that hesitation seeps into every throw. That's why this section of the story matters so much. Because Cleveland didn't just evaluate Shedeur's performance, they evaluated it through a flawed lens. And now, with the coaching staff that controlled that lens removed, the organization appears to be reassessing the process itself. This isn't about rewriting history or declaring past decisions malicious. It's about recognizing that performance without preparation doesn't tell the full story. And in Shedeur's case, many believe what the Browns saw wasn't the ceiling, it was the floor. Which makes the next phase dangerous and exciting at the same time. Because if preparation finally matches opportunity, excuses disappear. And the conversation around Shedeur Sanders shifts from what he survived to what he's capable of becoming. Long before front office decisions became public, the most important verdict was already forming inside the locker room. And according to reports, player reactions, and how events unfolded afterward, that verdict wasn't split. It leaned hard in one direction. Throughout the season, there were growing signs that players weren't fully aligned with the offensive staff connected to Rees. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic on record, just quiet signals, body language, comments that felt carefully worded, and a noticeable lack of public backing. In the NFL, that silence speaks volumes. Players don't have to say much for decision makers to understand when trust is slipping. At the same time, the opposite was happening on the other side of the ball. The defense had an identity. Roles were clear, accountability was consistent, and most importantly, players openly believed in Jim Schwartz. That belief didn't stay private for long. Denzel Ward, one of the team's leaders, publicly praised Schwartz and endorsed him for a head coaching opportunity. That wasn't scripted, that wasn't forced, that was a locker room leader speaking from experience. In NFL circles, player endorsements like that aren't casual compliments. They're signals that a coach commands respect. signals that players would run through a wall for him, and signals that ownership should pay attention. According to reports, that's exactly what happened. While Rees was quietly removed from the future plans, Schwartz was brought back for a second interview, and not just a routine one. Rumors suggest Cleveland moved quickly to keep him from being poached by other teams. That urgency says everything. When a franchise fears losing a coach, it's usually because the locker room has already chosen him. This contrast is impossible to ignore. On one side, a coach tied to frustration, questionable communication, and a system players reportedly didn't feel connected to. On the other, a coach whose players publicly vouched for him without hesitation. That's not about offense versus defense, that's about culture versus tension. To be fair, locker room dynamics are complex. Players don't see every meeting, coaches don't always get equal chances, and not every rumor reflects the full truth, but patterns matter. And when the same names keep appearing in positive conversations while others fade quietly out of the picture, organizations take notice. The Cleveland Browns weren't choosing schemes, they were choosing belief, they were choosing who players trusted to lead them forward. And once that choice became clear, the rest of the offseason decisions stopped looking random. Because in the NFL, when the locker room speaks, even quietly, smart organizations listen. At some point, an owner has to decide whether a problem can be patched or whether it needs to be torn out completely. For Jimmy Haslam, that moment appears to have come quietly, but the response was anything but subtle. This wasn't just about moving on from Kevin Stefansky. Coaches get fired every year. What made this different was what happened after. Instead of keeping familiar faces around for continuity, Haslam went further. He removed the entire branch connected to that era. No half measures, no safety nets. That's why Tommy Rees didn't survive the reset. Rees wasn't eased out or quietly reassigned. According to reports, he was eliminated from the head coaching search and is unlikely to remain with the Cleveland Browns in any role. That decision sends a clear signal. Haslam didn't just want a new voice at the top, he wanted distance from the entire structure that led to this point. From an ownership perspective, this move looks calculated. Keeping Rees would have meant preserving part of the same decision-making chain, the same philosophies, the same internal loyalties. And based on how the season unfolded, Haslam appears to have concluded that those loyalties were part of the issue. Whether fair or not, perception inside the building matters. And the perception was that the system wasn't serving the team's future. There's also a message here for the locker room. By cleaning house completely, Haslam signaled that no one was being protected for past relationships. Not experience, not reputation, not alignment with a former head coach. That kind of move resets accountability fast. Players notice it, coaches notice it. It tells everyone that results and how those results are achieved matter. To be clear, there's no public statement saying this decision was made specifically to protect Shedeur Sanders, but the timing makes the interpretation unavoidable. The quarterback situation was one of the most criticized aspects of the season, and the coaches tied most closely to that process are now gone. Haslam could have taken the easy route, fire Stefansky, keep Rees, call it a reset. Instead, he chose disruption. And disruption usually means ownership believes the culture itself was broken, not just the win-loss record. This wasn't panic, it was intent. Whether it works is a separate question, but one thing is clear, Jimmy Haslam wasn't interested in recycling the past. He wanted a clean slate, even if that meant cutting deeper than most owners would dare. And once an owner makes that kind of decision, the franchise doesn't just change direction. It commits to one. With the old structure gone, the spotlight now shifts fully to Shedeur Sanders, and for the first time, there's no confusion about where the organization stands. The politics are out. The mixed signals are gone. What's left is a clean runway, and that might be the most important development of all. For months, Shedeur existed in a gray area. Publicly, he was part of a competition. Privately, according to reports and widespread speculation, his opportunities were limited. Now that chapter is closed. The coaches who oversaw that process are no longer shaping his future, which means Shedeur will finally be evaluated in an environment that's either fully committed or fully transparent. That's a double-edged sword. On one hand, this reset benefits him enormously. A new staff means a fresh evaluation, no inherited bias, no loyalty to past decisions. If Cleveland brings in coaches who genuinely want to build around him, Shedeur gets something he hasn't had yet, alignment. alignment between coaching philosophy, play design, and player development, that alone can accelerate growth faster than any off-season workout. On the other hand, the excuses disappear. If the Browns truly commit to him with reps, preparation, protection, and weapons, the margin for error shrinks. Shedeur won't be judged on flashes anymore, he'll be judged on consistency, leadership, wins, and that's fair. Every franchise quarterback eventually reaches that point. What makes this moment different is context. Shedeur has already shown he can survive chaos. He's played without rhythm, without ideal preparation, without full organizational backing, and still he kept games competitive. Now the expectation shifts from survival to command, from potential to production. That's where belief becomes critical. Quarterbacks feel it when an organization believes in them. It changes how they process the field, how they lead huddles, how they respond after mistakes. If Cleveland follows through on this reset not just with words but with actions, Shedeur's confidence ceiling rises immediately. Of course, none of this guarantees success. Development isn't linear. New systems bring new challenges, and pressure will be higher than ever. But this is the first time Shedeur's future feels straightforward instead of tangled in internal conflict. This reset isn't a promise, it's an opportunity. And opportunities in the NFL are ruthless. You either take control of them or they move on without you. For Shedeur Sanders, this is the moment where the narrative finally shifts from what was done to him to what he does with the chance in front of him. And that's exactly how it should be. When you step back and look at everything that's happened, it becomes clear this was never just about one coach losing a job. What unfolded in Cleveland feels more like an admission than a reset. By cutting ties with Kevin Stefansky and completely removing Tommy Rees from the future picture, the Cleveland Browns quietly acknowledged that something fundamental wasn't working. For months, fans were told to trust the process, trust the quarterback competition, trust the evaluations being made behind closed doors. But now, the very people responsible for those decisions are gone, and that forces an uncomfortable reassessment of everything that came before it. That's why this story keeps circling back to Shedeur Sanders. If the competition was truly fair, why dismantle the entire structure that oversaw it? If development was handled correctly, why erase the coaches most closely tied to that plan? And if everything was based purely on merit, why does this reset feel so deliberate? None of this proves intent. None of it confirms sabotage. These remain interpretations based on timing, reporting, and outcomes. But in the NFL, actions often speak louder than statements, and Cleveland's actions suggest they weren't just unhappy with results, they were unhappy with how those results were reached. To the organization's credit, they didn't take the easy route. They didn't keep familiar faces for comfort or continuity. Ownership chose clarity over convenience. That matters in a league where teams often avoid admitting mistakes until it's too late. Now comes the part that will define this entire offseason. This reset doesn't guarantee success, it guarantees honesty. Shedeur will now be evaluated without built-in excuses on either side. If he thrives, it strengthens the argument that he was never the problem, the environment was. If he struggles, the conversation shifts, but at least it does so on fair ground. That's what makes this moment so important. The Browns didn't just change coaches, they chose a direction. They chose to stop living in the gray area where fans are told one story while reality plays out another way. And in a league built on accountability, that decision carries weight. So the real question isn't whether Tommy Rees deserved to be eliminated. The real question is whether Cleveland was finally willing to admit it got something wrong and brave enough to start over before it cost them even more. Because if this reset leads to real development, real belief, and real results, this offseason won't be remembered as chaos. It'll be remembered as the moment Cleveland stopped protecting the past and finally committed to the future.